So, what makes Neuvillette Story Quest so good? Why was it so good that I just had to have him in my character collection? Well, it is as simple as the story quest did exactly what a character story should do. It gave Neuvillette a character development. It's not a day in the life of the Udex kind of quest, or an NPC quest disguised as a character quest where we basically follow the character around for a day or two, and at the end of the quest, they're still the same person they were at the beginning of the quest. With Neuvillette, we were actually taken on a journey to witness his growth as a character, see how his view of himself changed by the end of the story, which led him to do what he did in the final act of Fontaine Archon quest. And that's what I want to talk about today because I think we need more story quests like this, and Neuvillette might just be the blueprint for those in the future. There will be mention of Fontaine Archon quest and Act 2 of Nahida's story quest in this video, so consider yourself warned of spoilers ahead. Now, prior to Fontaine, what we knew of the Dragon Sovereigns came from the Byakuya collection, the Three Realms Getaway offering event back in 2.5 and Nahida's second story quest. Volume 4 and 5 of the collection talked about a prophecy of old about a certain dragon of water, the ancient lord of Vishaps, that would be reborn in a human form. This dragon of water, along with the other 6, were known as the Seven Sovereigns of the Light Realm, the ruler of the old world before the arrival of the Primordial One. Then we encountered the very first confirmed Dragon Sovereign during Nahida's second story quest, Apep, the Dragon Sovereign of Dendro. I know you hate both gods and humans, Nahida said to Apep when Apep refused her help, which Apep confirmed, sneering at Nahida for even trying to help her, a dragon that would seek only to destroy Sumeru and the Seven Nations once healed. Although by the end of the quest, Apep admitted that the desire to destroy humanity had been replaced by a sense of peace. Once she's cleansed of the forbidden knowledge, what remains is her hatred towards the heavenly principles, the usurper. So that interaction with Apep, combined with this one particular line from Volume 4 of the collection, implied danger and war with the arrival of the Hydro Dragon. Prophecy holds that the Dragon Sovereign of Water will be born in a human form. We must not let this thing happen in Enkanomiya. The people of Enkanomiya were wary of the Hydro Dragon that they stopped all experiments on Vishaps to avoid the rebirth from happening. Should the Hydro Dragon be reborn in a human form, at least it should not take place in Enkanomiya. And so enter Neuvillette, Chief Justice of Fontaine, a white-haired man with purple-ish reptile pupils, a walking stick, and no hydrovision in sight. Very much a fitting description of Vishap people as explained by Angel, and the answer to the first riddle in the Byakuya collection Volume 5. Hints all over the place. It was only a matter of time before we got the confirmation. Neuvillette is the incarnation of the Hydro Dragon beyond a shadow of doubt. Although unlike Apep, Neuvillette is the furthest thing away from violence. In fact, he upholds justice in Fontaine, the very ideal of the god of justice, the Hydro Archon residing in the nation. Unlike Apep, who said that she would be ready to cheer and sneer at Nahida if she ever repeated the same mistake, Neuvillette's patience knew no bounds when it came to dealing with each and every one of Furina's antics. And by the end of Act 4, Neuvillette showed compassion to humanity when he overruled the sentence by pushing back the primordial seawater and resealing the gate in the fortress of Meripid. He even explicitly said to Traveler and Paimon that they shouldn't entertain the idea of returning his power for the sake of saving the people, because given the status quo, that would involve killing Furina, the current living Hydro Archon. So, to me personally, right, that was a delightful surprise. Not only did he not harbor ill intent towards humanity, the creation of the usurper who stole his power, but also, not even once he thought he must cause harm to the Hydro Archon, another one of the Heavenly Principles' creation that was made to replace him and to hold on to his stolen power. Basically, up to this point, the story set up the foundation of Neuvillette as a character. It's clear that he's very much a contradiction to the image of Dragon Sovereigns, bitter, full of hatred towards humanity and the Archons. And it also set up the goal, the one question that we had going into his story quest. If he was not there to take over the rulership of the nation, what was it that he was trying to achieve? The story quest offered the answer to that question very early in the quest. Neuvillette thought of himself as an outsider in Fontaine. Despite his form, he's not human. Despite his position, he's not Fontainian. He had lived all his life in Fontaine, but he didn't belong there. Why was he born in a human form? Why was he made the Chief Justice? What was the purpose of his existence? The very same questions echoed in his character teaser. So that was his initial state of mind at the beginning of the story. In fact, it had always been his state of mind. He admitted as much to Carol as we saw in one of his memories. And this particular exchange between the two is one of the most important parts of this quest, because this was the first time that we saw Neuvillette sharing something personal about himself to another. He had always had this reserved aura about him, his character detail revealing as much. If it's not something related to work, he wouldn't know how to handle himself in the conversation. But this exchange, he was being open and vulnerable with Carol, relating to her struggle and aspiration. And I think there's a reason for that. There's a reason that this was the only time we saw Neuvillette opening up to anyone ever. As he revealed at the start of the story, a case similar to the one they were about to investigate in the present time had happened in the past before, and that case cost him Carol's life and Vautrin's exile. People knew of Neuvillette's close relation to the Melusines, and they abused that to get to him. But in the past, what they didn't see coming was that Neuvillette got two very loyal and trustworthy friends/subordinates. Carol was framed for murder by the people, but before it could escalate further, before it could drag Neuvillette into the mess, Carol chose to sacrifice herself, hoping it would pacify the situation. And when Vautrin heard of that, when he learned of what happened, he chose to take justice in his own hand, avenging Carol in the process. And as impartial as he had always been, Neuvillette deemed Vautrin guilty, resulting in his exile in the Fortress of Meripit. So, instead of making Neuvillette give up his role, the scheme ended up demonstrating just how impartial Neuvillette could be, resulting in the people turning to side with him. That incident happened all the way back in his early days as Chief Justice, and I just couldn't stop myself from wondering if that's the reason that Neuvillette has been keeping his distance from others. The one time that he did open up and befriend the people, it put them in harm's way. So, isn't it obvious then? In order to keep the people safe, Neuvillette has to keep them at arm's length. Ironically, this belief contradicted the goal he was trying to achieve. I mentioned this briefly in my Furina analysis video. While Furina is the most god a human can be, Neuvillette is the most human a god can be. Well, technically he's not a god, but you get my point. Furina and Neuvillette shared a similar character journey, two sides of the same coin. For starters, they were a fraction of their full power and identity. Furina, the human side of the Hydro Archon, lacking her divinity and the whole truth of who she was. Neuvillette, the Hydro Dragon-born human, missing his full dragonhood power and memories of his predecessor. While Furina is human, placed in the role of a god, Neuvillette is this powerful being, a sovereign of the old world, placed in the role of a human. While Furina was quick to put on the Archon mask as idolized by the people in order to keep the people safe, Neuvillette believed it best to keep his distance from any personal ties so that those around him would not be in harm's way. Furina embraced her godhood as instructed by Mirrorher, and it was through this resilience that Furina succeeded in the one goal assigned to her. So, it's only natural that Neuvillette needed to embrace his humanity so that he could achieve his goal. He needed to put down the walls that kept him from the people around him, to see that things were different now than 400 years ago, and to understand that being among humans was the goal of his existence all along. We saw these differences throughout the story, starting with the people's view and acceptance of the Melusines. We saw Kiara being offered to be a model for Chioria Boutique's new clothing line for children. 400 years ago, the people angrily stated that two species just couldn't coexist. But now Kiara, a Melusine, would be the model to promote clothes for children. Then Charlotte mentioned that she did an interview with Kiara a month prior and it was very well received. So she was quite surprised that anyone would be sending a threat letter to Kiara. And if those subtle demonstrations were not enough, after we investigate by the Fountain of Lucine, we saw the people rushing to protect the Melusines when they heard of the rumor about the threat letter, angered at whoever it was that sent that letter to Kiara. And later it was revealed that the one who sent that letter was a criminal that was exiled to the Meripit after a case that Kiara was in charge of. It was something along the lines of, "This officer got me in jail, I'm gonna get back at her," rather than, "This Melusine got me in jail, I'm gonna get back at her so she would regret ever stepping foot in the court of Fontaine." Then Wriothesley made sure that Neuvillette got this fact ingrained in his brain by telling him that how the people treated the Melusines was a reflection of their attitude towards Neuvillette. Kiara is treated differently than Carol was, because Neuvillette has gained the trust and respect of the people. The Melusines are now part of Fontaine because Neuvillette is part of Fontaine. And ironically still, despite Neuvillette having done his best not to get too close to those around him, this story has proved that he did quite a lousy job at that. Starting with Clorane, who offered to watch over Kiara so that Traveler and Paimon could continue investigating with Neuvillette. Their relation was that of an employer and an employee, Clorane said, and it didn't feel right to her to see her employer investigating such a trivial case by himself. Then there's Navia, who showed up as soon as she heard the rumor of the case, offering to look around for any potential suspects, coming back with a bunch of them before Neuvillette and Traveler could work out the motive and a list of potential suspects themselves. On a side note, I found it hilarious that these bad guys, they're obviously scared of Navia. One glare from her and they're all coming running to her. Then there is Wriothesley, who let Neuvillette know that Vautrin had never resented him. His outburst in court, that was all an act to win over everyone who was once on the fence about Neuvillette. These people, Clorane, Navia, Wriothesley, they all came to his aid, volunteering their time and energy because they wanted to. Neuvillette didn't even have to ask. They're probably the closest thing to friends Neuvillette could have in the present day. In the end, we're back on our way to Palermonia, and Neuvillette mulled over Wriothesley's words. He asked the Traveler's opinion about it, and I like how him asking the Traveler and hearing what the Traveler got to say was not this big turning point moment in the plot. I like it so much because that shows that his entire personality, it doesn't revolve around what the Traveler got to say about him. He simply wanted to hear the Traveler's perspective, and then he said he would reflect on it further. And finally, we're presented with the cutscene. Memories in water oftentimes could be convoluted, Neuvillette said. Timelines mixed up, fused together, so now instead of Carol being bullied and rejected by society for being of a different species, another Fontainian stood in front of her and dared the bullies to step forward and fight him. Instead of facing the sunny days ahead by himself, Carol and Vautrin were there to greet him. Hydro Dragon, don't cry," shouted that boy at the start of the cutscene, but what truly stopped the rain, what erased Neuvillette's sadness, was seeing Carol's and Vautrin's smiling faces in his memory. I couldn't stress enough how much I love this cutscene. And the choice of the music too, the title literally translates to rain in the city, is very Neuvillette coded. And mixed together in the memory was Furina's voice, albeit more mature, exactly the same voice heard in Neuvillette's teaser video.
"And one day, when you have dwelt among humanity long enough, you will be placed to bring judgment over all as a spokesperson for Fontaine's past."
She said that, right? But we didn't really understand what that meant, not until we got to Act 5 of Fontaine Archon Quest, until we came face to face with the owner of that mature voice, Fussalors, Furina's divinity. It was at this moment that Neuvillette's growth as a character was finally put to test. Neuvillette of the 400 years ago did not hesitate to sentence Vautrin, his very own close friend, to a life in exile in Meripit, despite acknowledging that Vautrin's revenge was a form of justice, believing that personal justice didn't equal to justice defined by law. But Neuvillette now, with all that he had experienced, learned, and felt, was not so quick to judge Egeria and Fussalors both. Theirs was not a sin, as much as it was a desire to exist among humans, much like Carol's aspiration, much like what Vautrin fought for until the end. It was their own form of justice. And so for once, the Chief Justice of Fontaine was not as impartial as he had been. Feeling what he felt, his understanding of humanity growing, how could he ever declare them guilty? Neuvillette studied his journey as a Hydro Dragon born in a human form, having little to no clue why he was born the way he was, why he was placed among the people, his understanding of humanity and their feelings even less. Then the incident happened, and he thought it was best not to engage in interpersonal relations with others as to not repeat the incident, believing himself to be an outsider for the next few centuries. Had it not been for his story quest, Neuvillette wouldn't have learned that he's no longer the outsider that he thought he was. We wouldn't have known of his struggle to understand himself and to relate to humans' emotions. The little speech that he did when Fussalors asked for his verdict wouldn't make sense as much, like where was this desire to feel as human felt coming from? And seeing him forgive the people of Fontaine for their sin, knowing that he couldn't forgive Vautrin for his act of revenge in the past, that was his growth. That was the character he was growing into. A compassionate leader, befitting to rule over the nation left behind by their Archon, who had loved the people more than her own life. So, whose story quest should I cover next? Let me know in the comment below. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.